Ich komme aus der Türkei. Wir haben in diesem Kurs viele wichtige Informationen gelernt und wir haben hier Excel, Word, PowerPoint und andere Informationen gelernt.
Obwohl ich bereits Erfahrung mit MS Office hatte, habe ich viele nützliche Informationen, habe ich viele Ratschläge über cybersecurity.
I embarked on this course is because, as you know now, everywhere in the world is digital. So I need to upgrade myself. The fear of being left behind, that's a real fear for me. So with this course now, I've learned Microsoft, the Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. It helps me in my present, what I'm doing now.
Mir hat Thema über personale Netzwerke gefallen und noch über LinkedIn, weil im Deutsch es ist sehr wichtig, wenn du willst einen neuen Job finden oder wahrscheinlich willst du mit anderen kommunizieren.
I'm really thankful to Acronis for giving a chance for us who on our recovery to learn a new skill, to upgrade ourselves, and we can use it during our course of work. Always remember that recovery is a long process. Never give up. Is there any courses that you have that is available? Do join because it will benefit you in future.
Thank you very much.
The winning drive isn't what decides a game. Every play, every pass, every performance is perfected on the training field, producing critical data that's analyzed, measured, and studied, delivering the razor-thin margins that define success. Acronis keeps that data safe and ensures it's there to use whenever and wherever it's needed. That's how we define the win before the win. Acronis Cyber Protect, the integrated solution for data backup and cybersecurity.
Chimene ndimakondwera nacho anthu kukabwera zinthu zaboma
sikuli njofunika kwambiri poiti imene yothandiza kusekuno kuti vana aphunzire ndikuti ziti chitira ubwino mwina vana awakhoza chakhala anthu ozindikira kusiyana na ife kuone kuti pamene timabadwa ife kudalibe sikulu ndi vanawo ndi chinthu chofunikira kwambiri kuti sikuli timange kuti vana akhale ophunzira malo abwino.
Idzathandiza kwambiri chifukwa kuti sitimakhala madeski yangu kama madeski kumasika skulu yoti anthu azira kamayiona ndithu azina kuti akuti kuli skulu anakuphunzira.
The win wasn't made here, or here, or here. Wins are made in thousands of hours of hard work and dedication. These thousands of hours produce data which is studied, analyzed. Data used to perfect each team, pushing them to the limit. This is where the win is made. The win before the win. Acronis keep that data safe and ensure it's there to use whenever and wherever it's needed. Acronis Cyber Protect, the integrated solution for data backup and cybersecurity.
Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm your host today. My name is Gaidar. I'm the president of Acronis. And today I'm welcoming two great people to talk about NIS2 directive. Today joining me will be Martin, founder and director of Cyber Nordics, and Jeff Hardy, global solutions analyst at Acronis. So, shall we begin, gentlemen?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's begin from a very easy question. Can you explain to me what is NIS2 and pretend I'm a business owner without any IT experience? I will address that question to Jeff first.
Yeah, that's NIS2 is everything that businesses should have been doing all along, but may or may not have been actually doing. So I would say that it's basic common sense cybersecurity measures made consistent across the EU just like goods and services can cross member state borders without impediment. It allows the laws and enforcement actions around cybersecurity to cross borders exactly the same way. That's the intent of it. What do you think, Morten?
I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, obviously, I'm by my accent not from the US, so having a bit more local presence in Europe. One of the things that is, I think, many business owners and especially internet providers, so to speak, or IT service providers, is that the EU has realized that the threat and landscapes that we see in the business world today is much changed over the last 3-4 years, 5 maybe. And that means we have to do something. We also know that there's it's very hard to get cyber criminals to jail. So I think the legislators has done something differently of saying, if we can't catch them, we can prevent them coming in. And that's exactly what you were talking about, Jeff, is there's a number of issues that anyone doing business within the EU or to the EU should comply with, where the intent is to keep cyber criminals out. I think that's the overall broadband for the NIS2 directive being implemented in Europe by October this year. So I hope that puts more depth into what you said, but I agree.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to keep cyber criminal away.
Exactly.
The issue, I think, is that the cybercrime is an incredible way of making money, right? It's not as dangerous as a crime in physical world, and anybody could do it from anywhere. So yeah, it's kind of sad for those of us who are trying to protect customers against cybercrime. But the follow-up question to this is, we're talking about NIS2. What is different in NIS2 versus NIS previous, a regional NIS directive? So Martin, what do you think?
Well, the major difference is, again, ties back to the general threat landscape, and they have expanded the areas between, when the previous version of NIS 1 was restricted to 4 areas. Now you are expanding again into a much broader area of application within the EU, and mainly to ensure that stability of the society. So that will, it'll take you anywhere from electricity, from supplies to healthcare, to transportation, to food. There is a long distinguished list of areas where the NIS2 security regulations will apply to, and we can share the full list, or you can basically just check the EU directives webpage, and there you have the full list of areas.
Yeah, but what does it mean for a business owner, and what does it mean for a managed service provider? And Jeff, maybe you can share some ideas.
Sure. The first thing is, agreeing with what Morton said, but taking it a step further. One of the problems, and this too is designed to solve a few problems, and then do some new directives. The problems that it was solving are there was a lot of confusion amongst member states about who really had to comply and what those compliance requirements entailed. I'm going to use a specific example in the healthcare industry. You had certain types of hospitals in Germany and medical clinics were deemed to be covered by first NIS, and then nearby countries would say, no, different hospitals and different types of medical clinics need to be covered because they had a different definition of what was a mission critical infrastructure enterprise. The next thing is it reaches deeper, right? It says, here we are, everybody's responsible for cybersecurity. Nobody is not responsible. And even if you outsource your cybersecurity services to an outside vendor, you are still responsible and your vendor is still responsible as well. Again, it's not saying that anything majorly different from what good cybersecurity practices are. It's just extending that in the United States we use the term liability, extending that responsibility and liability out to everybody who should be touching it in the first place. And I would add that there's one more aspect of NIS2. NIS2 emphasizes automation and automated responses for quicker response time a little bit more than the regular NIS does. Did I answer your question, Gaidar, or did I dodge it?
Yeah, you kind of did. And, being American, when I hear liability, I hear expensive, right? That's what happens. So a lot of people, when they hear compliance, they think, oh, that's another cost. So my question would be, is it just extra cost for MSPs to comply and nothing will really change? Or is it an opportunity for them? So, Morton, what's your view?
Yeah. It's definitely the latter, because if you take the offset, as Jeff said, this is something that should anyone who delivers IT services and have order in the books and everything else should do this. So and what we unfortunately see in broader aspects of EU is quite a few companies actually and service providers do not have this nailed down as they should have done. So to me, it's actually a differentiator, being able to say, we do things the right way. We can document it, and if one of your customers receives an audit visit, we have documentation in place. It's basically just log into our portal. You can see what we have done. You can see it, for a certain period, back in time, 6 or 12 or even 18 months, whatever you decide to keep. But that's just to satisfy the auditors. But in my view, coming from the cybersecurity world, where the obvious and most direct goal is to keep my customers safe, that's the first and foremost. And if you can document it, you're doing everything that you should. That will also make you think of, are there any blind angles? Are there any blind spots? Are there stuff that I'm not doing? And which will make it so much easier to increase the security posture if your risk changes at a certain point in time. So to cut it back to you, Guider, is I actually see this as the IT service provider an option to both increase security, but it will also be a list of things to do that you can speak to your customers about, which will make that discussion so much easier if you look at it from a commercial perspective as well. But the primary target is, increasing the security posture so that hackers and criminals will move on to someone who does not have that security level and backup capabilities as Acronis and others provide. So from my point, this is very, very much a matter of getting order in-house and then actually use that to how to mature the customer journey over time. I hope that answers your question.
It sure does, but we were working in IT for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And we all know that most of the companies, and especially business owners, they don't think like we're going to get hit or we're going to get ransomed. They think it will never happen to them. And a lot of managed service providers, they were using something like cyber insurance requirement to force them to use security, basically telling them, if you do this, this, and that, then you'll pay less. And that people understand. So what you're saying basically means that it will be easier for an MSP to talk to a business owner in terms of deploying security because it's a requirement.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And a good example, I mean, everyone knows the if we take the simple part, the backup capabilities of Acronis. I mean, when we go out to customers in Denmark, where I originate from or where I live many companies says, yeah, we have a backup. And I tell him, that's great, but have you done a test, that you can actually restore it from it? Yeah, we do that, every so and so often. I said, that's fine. But the most easy thing to do is actually ask your backup provider, can you just send me a monthly report? What have you done? Has the backup been done continuously? Has there been any breakage in the backup process, so on and so forth? So much about this for the IT service providers or ISPs is start documenting. And that ties back to what Jeff said before of saying, compliance, documentation. But it is actually just showing that you're doing what you're paid to do. And quite a few ISPs neglect of showing them what services they're delivering. They can actually do it, but they're not doing it. And I think that's where the unified platform and all the other capabilities that we have in this area comes in so very nice and neat.
Okay, thank you.
If I could
go ahead.
Let me build on that real quick. So, Morton's exactly right. If you are an MSP or an SSP and you're already operating at cybersecurity awareness, at a good cybersecurity awareness level, NIS 2 is not going to be that shocking for you. It's going to be things that you're going to review it. And you're going to say, these are things that we are already doing. There's a couple differences that will jump out at you. One is that there's formalized reporting requirements. So if you have currently, you don't know, you have to report an incident occurring, and there's rules about reporting an incident. You're going to see that those are still there, but they're changed and they're formalized so that you have specific windows in which to do it. And the local member state governments have the obligation to take and provide you with a mechanism to do it. So in one way, you're going to have a very formal reporting structure, but in another way, it's going to be easier because the government's required to take and provide you with a mechanism to make reporting easier. So you're going to notice things like that happening. And then the rest of it's going to be mostly things like just being able to articulate and document and articulate that you are doing what you say you're doing and that those things are in general alignment with industry best practices. And, sorry, just extended. Thanks.
Yeah, Jeff, I'll build on your response. So kind of shifting gears, but what is required from the EU member states to help companies to comply?
A couple of things. First of all, as Morton, who's got a background in law, he's very well pointed out to all of us. There's a difference between a regulation and directive, and I'll let him spell that out. But what the government's requirements here are, they've got to implement local laws that support the directives from the EU, right? They've got to take and actually embody those laws and make them come to fruition. And so when those all happen, even though the EU directive is supposed to take place in October, the different member states, there may be some time lag in between the two, but they all need to implement laws that bring it to life, if you will. The next thing is they are required to take and provide all companies and service providers with mechanisms for doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, for example, the incident reporting requirements, they're supposed to provide you with specific forms and hopefully online resources. So it's very easy for you to, and if you're in the middle of an incident, to take and go and file the reports you need to do without making any mistakes. Standardized language, standardized reporting requirements. So they've got to support the MSPs specifically in this way by providing those tools. But Morton, it might be worth talking about the difference between regulation and directive because you educated us on that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It was
No,
just
it's
courtesy.
good.
But anyway, great stuff. No, I mean, in the broader EU regulation, and this is not to be a legal lecture, but there are actually two ways of implementing laws. One is where the EU states, decide, the legislative body of EU decides this is what all member states have to comply with, and as soon as the EU legal system has approved that legislation, then it's enforceable in all member state countries. However, the EU directives are not as such. The directives will harmonize whatever rules, and then each member state, being Denmark one, is then told by this and this date, you have to have local legal legislation in place, which carries out the rules and regulations decided by the EU. And we all know that for the NIS2, a certain key date is 17th of October 2024. It has been known for quite some time. Unfortunately, for Denmark, we can go into the other countries afterwards, but for Denmark, the defense ministry who runs the NIS2 implementation actually came out and said, due to extended preparation time, Denmark will not have local legislation in place by the EU date. So what that actually means is, and a lot of other countries in EU will end up in the same situation. So what that means is EU has put an obligation onto the country, but the country hasn't implemented, i.e. that gives affected companies longer time to implement, and the government can't come on control visits until the local legislation is in place. And the latest I have heard from the defense minister that I'm actually sitting at right now is that by December 24 or January 25, the legislation will be in place in Denmark, and then we would know what the exact rules you have to comply with. And to your point, Jeff, also is you can't send in reports of hacks and logs and so on and so forth, because that channel is not opened until the local legislation is in place. But I mean, I would say to this, my major point is, don't let this become the pillow you put your head on at night, because the rules is gonna hit you one way or the other. In Europe, we do trade with many countries. That also means that some other countries like Hungary, who is quite far in the process, I actually do believe they have implemented the local law. So if you sell goods and services to Hungary, you might as well comply with the laws, because those are enforced there, despite that you're living in Denmark. So these are the rules behind it. So we are in a gap period where countries are struggling to implement it. But I mean, my best advice would be just get it done. We all know what 90% of 95% of everything is going to be. So get that in place, and then the rest will come once the local legal work is in place. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Oh, just rephrase that. I'm sorry, Jeff. Just to rephrase that. So your recommendation is to start the process, not waiting for the local legislation, because eventually, one way or the other, NIS2 will be adopted by all member states. So if you do business in Europe right now, you have to implement it, and it's better to start now so you won't get in trouble in any of the EU member states, right? So, Jeff.
Completely agree.
Sure, and it's good to get started now for two reasons. Number one, because that way you ensure you're compliant and you're not going to have any problems or fines or bad audits. But it also makes great sense from a marketing perspective. I mean, right now you have, if you're an MSP, if you're a service provider at all in Europe, you have a 6-month, my opinion, window of opportunity to own this issue in your marketplace. And I would start very, very simply. If you are providing security services in Europe, I would map all of my services I provide directly to the points that are made in NIS and NIS2. I would map it out so that you can and start pointing out to your customers and pointing out to your website, hey, we provide this, and this is going to take and address this requirement that you have, whether you know it or not. And we're going to provide this, and this is going to address this requirement, whether you know it or know it or not. You need to comply. And it's just start developing the reputation of being NIS2 compliant first. and be associated with that. So when these laws start going through, you'll already have that positioning statement ready to go. I think it's a great marketing opportunity in addition to a compliance requirement, if that makes sense.
So just to rephrase here, is basically now it is an opportunity. In the future, when everybody will be compliant, it will not be an opportunity. So you have a head start if you start implementing right now, right? So let us entertain our listeners for just a little bit. So what, in your view, is the most confusing aspect of NIS2? And I will start with Martin.
Most confusing aspect is the implementation. The legislators' local body have had a great opportunity to boost cybersecurity. They have selected not to for various different reasons from one country to the other. That takes care of the legislation. That takes care of the brand spot. What I would look at from the implementation part is, as any other client or customer, what is actually enough? The NIS directive does not tell you, here's a toolbox, here's a hammer, here's a screwdriver, and here's whatever these tools are called, use that. So it's all left up to the customer to decide what is enough, and then prove in terms of an audit, I have done it sufficiently and good enough. So it all ties back to getting a framework to fit everyone in a society. And I think that's where it's hard. That's where the local legislation and in the countries where they give an opportunity to say, healthcare, you have to focus on that. Transportation, you have to focus on this. Cloud service providers who provide storage, you have to focus on that. That is a very, very good idea. But until we know what those things specifically are, it's going to be a trying to have a balloon with water. I don't know what you call that in English, but you're trying to juggle it and hold it in place. And it's a little bit hard, I understand. So I think that takes it down to that's where it's hard. But I also think that's a little bit of a sad excuse or bad excuse, because if you look at the directive, it talks about you have to have your risk and information system security policies, which is just policy, policy and procedures. You have to have incident response management in place. You have to have backup. So it all ties down to, 90% is what I call IT hygiene. And that's where we can, as an ISP, can really help them get in place. So that takes the confusion out of it. So the confusion, I think, to summarize, is the rules are not very clear and distinct, but we have in our toolbox what can actually create a good foundation. And if I may say one more thing to you directly, Guider, is right now, if you look at the market space, there are so many people talking about NIS2. You guys are the first one who is actually addressing the NIS2 directive to the ISPs, who will then again talk to their customers. So this forum, and that's why I find it so interesting, you have a much, much broader footprint than many of the other, webinars and information pieces like this that we're doing. So I think this is really, really a smart move. Let's address it to the ISPs and then let them take it on. So
Thank
I hope
you, Martin.
for the people out there, it helps. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jeff, what's confusing for you?
Well, and this is the thing, and that confusing for me or confusing for the market. I think that the most confusing thing is related to something that Morten said, and that is, yes, NIS2 is going to bring more harmony to cybersecurity directives across Europe, but it's not going to bring complete harmony. There's still going to be differences between member states and how they deal with things, and there's specific language. Believe it or not. Well, you know this, guy. I read the entire law over the Christmas holiday break, so Merry Christmas to me. So what we did is it has specific language in it. Things like it says, like, I'm going off from memory, instances of cross-border dimensions or cross-border impacts in between member states. It uses languages like that because the NIS2 is saying, you know what? If you have a corporate office, say in in Germany and your distribution center has been moved to France because it's a little more centrally located for where your market is, you now have two places where you need to comply. Now, across, we've been dealing with things like this for a long time, Gunnar. So we have 53 data centers in different countries to help people deal with data sovereignty issues. But companies are still going to have to understand that there's going to be a difference between, even though a lot of similarity, there's going to be a difference between how these directives are created and legalized and formalized in France versus Germany versus any other EU member state. So that's going to be a little bit confusing, but I think that ultimately it won't be. If you always just target, if you make what's the expression? Shift everything to the right. If you start with a cybersecurity mindset from the get-go, you will end up being compliant 99.9% of the time with whatever the member states have to offer you. So I think there's going to be a little confusion there. People will believe that it's complete harmony, but it's more like jazz. There's a little disharmony amongst the states.
Okay, that's a great answer. So kind of closing up on this, people are people, right? And we were talking about the good parts of NIS2, and that's it's improving our security posture, and it's important, and everybody understands that it's important. But we have great example. I'm sorry, people not wearing seatbelts in their cars, even though there's just a lot of research, a lot of tests showing that's important for your safety to wear a seatbelt. So the governments have to imply some penalties, right? So if you are pulled over by a police officer, you'll get a ticket for not wearing your seatbelt. So is it a good thing to do? Yes, but you're not doing it because if nobody is going to force you to do it or give you some penalty for it, you may ignore it. So the last question that I have is, what are the risks of non-compliance? What are the penalties? So Martin, let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, it's very easy. I mean, either, executive management, which is the CIO or president, whatever title you wear, and the board risk either fines or even jail time. So that's, that is what the directive will tell you. Of course, you can get administrative slaps over your hand as a lesser mean to do it. But I think what you will see is, and you can see that with the GDPR directive as well, is the fines, whether you're fined in Germany or in Denmark, I tell you, there is a huge difference between the fines. I mean, in Denmark, the fines are very insignificant, whereas in other European countries, the fines are massive. And I think what the EU is trying to do as well here is to ensure that the local implementation and vis-a-vis the fines and remediation that they can do in order to let people be compliant it needs to be more heavy than what has been implemented in the GDPR. So they're trying to harmonize. The fines will be greater. In really bad instances, there will be jail time.
Yeah, I think NIS2 needs to have some kind of a marketing tagline like "Be secure or go to jail." That would work, right?
Or at least be secure or be fined. I mean, I think that's probably a more appropriate. But I understand what you're saying, and I really hope that the local implementation and follow-up on this will not drown in legal battles and so on and so forth, because we're actually fighting a greater good, and the people who don't want to comply will have to pay. That's my personal view of it, because we are fighting a greater good.
It's worth mentioning that the NIS2 directive also opens up another possibility. Although no states have passed, supporting legislation yet, it opens up the possibility of either suspension or forfeiture of business licenses. So, if they can just if you're a repeat bad offender, they can shut you down. I think that's what the gist of it is.
Got it. So we at the end of our time, but we have one last question that is coming from the chat, is about foreign partners and compliance of foreign companies operating in EU with NIS2. So is it a requirement? Martin?
Yeah.
Jeff, go ahead. I was just the line was breaking up just a little bit. So could you repeat the
Yeah,
question?
so what about the foreign companies? If they are partnering with the companies operating in EU, do they have to comply?
Well, only the company within the EU has to comply, but, and this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, even within a group of companies, a sister company, other company, or whatever you want to call it, is then regarded as a supplier and then effectively will have to comply with it. But they are not, if you're situated in Singapore or whatever, you are not as such, that company in itself, compliant with NIS2, will have to be compliant with NIS2. However, as they are supplying services to a subsidiary, that's where the hammer will get you. So in a second line, you have to be compliant.
Okay, perfect.
That's my reading of what's come out in Denmark, at least.
Perfect. Thank you. And we are at the end of our time, so maybe just like half a minute for the final thoughts. Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to say that, there's a lot here. Trust me, it's hundreds of pages. Trust me, it's hundreds of pages that you have to go through, but it's worth it, and they're trying to do a good job. But what we did is, when I read through it, we put together all of my notes of the things that we thought that might be directly applicable or MSP might need to understand. We put it in a white paper. So anybody who's listening right now, if you, good, you have it right there. You can scan that QR code and access the white paper, download it, and you can see our thoughts. You're going to find the things we talked about here, but you're also going to find a few other things we didn't talk about here yet, like business automation and how AI comes into play. So I'd like to leave on that note. Morten,
Yes.
How about you?
So closing up on this, everybody grab a phone, scan the QR code, and get.
Oh, Gaia, the code just disappeared, so I think someone's running the show here needs to get the code up in here. But again, I just want to say thank you for an interesting discussion and an interesting perspective from many places in the world. And let's go out there and protect our customers. That's what it's all about.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day. And I hope to hear you and see you in our future broadcast. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye for now.